And boy, this is a nice crowd and not a lot of sports-oriented people. By the way, I'm Jim Milliken. I'm the chair of the Concord Historical Society, not the New Hampshire Historical Society, your very own Concord Historical Society. And our office, by the way, is on the second floor, right over here in the building here. We are really fortunate to have a great program this evening and some folks who really know the history of hockey in Concord. We're really pleased they all agree to be here. But if I was to add up all the ages, should I do that?
No.
Wait, give me a 200.
Way more than that.
But
Underestimate.
part of what we usually do to introduce people, by the way, we've been around for about 15 years now, and we're in the process of gathering things for our archives and so forth. But you probably won't see a museum for Concord because we've got the New Hampshire Historical Society and other places. There's one at the police station. There's one at the fire department, for example. Museums, and sometime you may want to try to get in and see those. But we're more like, I'm looking for that right word, we're the place you call to find out where to find more of the history of clearinghouse is the word I should be using. So we're glad you're here tonight. There are a couple of things I should encourage you to do. One, over here you can join the Historical Society. I think it's all of $25 or something like that, so I don't think that'll break you if you'd like to do that. But also, we have a history book. And this is the history book that was chaired, well, by myself, but the author is actually John Milne. John Milne was a newspaper person who worked out of the State House for many years. And along with a whole bunch of other local people who wrote this book, and this is the history of the 20th century. And I really encourage you, we've got a special deal on those over here tonight. But I happened to grab it, and the sports section is somewhere around page 130 or something like that. And the very first page of the sports section has the St. Paul's School hockey area back in the early part of the century. Whoops, you okay, John? And on a couple of pages later, believe it or not, we got Doug Everett here. And I don't have to tell you who Doug Everett is. All I can say is a little boy, I had the wonderful experience of him coming to a church event, and he was kind enough to show me the silver medal that they won. And that's right now at the Historical Society, and if you've got the right connections, I think you can probably get that out of there for an event if you needed to do that. There are still 2 living girls, his children in town. One of them is Cynthia Everett White, and and I just forgot the other person's name, the other girl. I'll think of it in a second. And nice people. So Doug Everett is on to in there a couple of pages, and lo and behold, what we come to is Tara Mounsey. Now, how do you beat that? I mean, hasn't Concord really done its part in the world of hockey? I'm pretty proud of our community, quite frankly. And to even touch another mark, Doug Walsh is listed in here as well. If you go to the index, it's an excellent index. I suspect you're going to find a bunch of people that you know. So these are on sale tonight, and I strongly encourage you. It's a $59.50 book, I think it was. They're $20 tonight for this event. I don't think you can lose out on that. So, Legends, New Hampshire Legends of Hockey. Well, the way we're handling this tonight, Jim Hayes is going to be moderating a discussion with 4 folks that know their stuff, and I'm going to let him introduce them. So, Director Hayes, go for it.
Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome to the Concord Historical Society podcast on the history of hockey here in Concord, New Hampshire. I'm Jim Hayes, as he said, and before we get started with our guest introductions, I'd like to acknowledge and thank a couple of people. First of all, and I see him here tonight, Ken Kale for his help in promoting tonight's event yesterday on his WKXL radio show. Thank you, Ken. And thank you to Hunk O'Connell. Hunk has provided to the Legends of Hockey, and perhaps others, some of the video that you'll see tonight, some video clips, particularly from White Park and at St. Paul's School. And we also wish a speedy recovery for Hunk. He had a bad stroke and was in critical condition, but I understand he's better at this time. And I was told by a local guy that he'd be moving into a nursing home afterwards, for assisted living, certainly. And lastly, to Bill Jennings of Bedford Community Television Station. Bill took all our DVDs that we have and reformatted them into MP4 files and then edited them further for tonight's presentation. I'm joined by our 4 panelists who have long, successful, varied associations with hockey here in New Hampshire, particularly in Concord. It's my pleasure to introduce Ken McKinnon, Bob Norton, George Chase, and Dunk Walsh. A warm welcome to each of you, and thanks for being with us tonight. Many of our viewers and listeners will likely know you from your long association, but let me take a few minutes to share a few more details, particularly with the viewers at home. Ken, you were from UNH. You were at UNH from 1958 to 1962 and had the distinction of being the first Canadian recruited there. You wore the C in your senior season and still hold the record for most goals in a game with 6. You played on 2 teams out of Concord, the Shamrocks and the Coachmen, before adding another 12 years in the Capital City Hockey League, as well as the Laconia Hockey League, and officiated for about 30 years. You coached the Tide at Concord High School, and you were the founder and president of the Granite State Hockey League in the early to mid-60s. So Ken, with 60-plus years of local hockey history in and around Concord, who are the major influences that promoted the local hockey scene when you were here?
I'd say, Jim, when I first came to Concord, I originally from UNH, I planned to go back to Toronto and going into teaching and being a coach, but when I looked at the geography, I said, I'd like to see if I get an application to Concord. So I put an application in there and talked to Harlan Atherton, the superintendent, saying I'd like to see if I could do any coaching or whatnot there. And so sure enough, I got a contract to come to Concord, and very, very happy. One of the best decisions I ever made in my life. The first year at Concord High was assistant coach to Paul Dupont. He was in the school system, and he played up at St. Michael's College in Vermont. So my position would be assistant coach to Paul the first year, and then he got a principalship, I think, at Walker School. So I took over the head coaching job in my second year there. But
with regard to the major influences here when you arrived for hockey, besides yourself in the Granite State Hockey League being the president and also a player for the Concord Shamrocks, who were some of the people during those Shamrock years, coachmen, and from what you saw, the Eastern Olympics, that made a major impact in the city of Concord?
Well, you have to go back and look at Russ Martin and Steve Winship and Malcolm McLean, the mayor. They were the one that put together the Douglas N. Everett Arena, and after my first year here, somebody told me that they built an arena down in Manchester at JFK, so we went down there to take a look at it, and sure enough, that was a great facility to start off with the Granite State Hockey League. And but Russ and Malcolm and Steve really got going on the Douglas and Everett Arena. They were the ones that guided it, and you know, Manchester already had their rink, so people in Concord want to have a rink also. So they put together the plans to make that happen.
Terrific, thank you. Bob Norton. Bob, your resume in hockey broadcasting is extensive. First on New Hampshire Public Television and later on New England Sports Network, with Sean McDonough handling the Hockey East games. You spent 6 seasons at UNH as Charlie Holt's assistant coach and prime recruiter, then moved to Concord in 1976, where you were a coach and the president of the Concord Youth Hockey Association for a year. You've also received 2 New England Emmy Awards, 1979 and 89, and also a Hockey East Media Award in 2004. So your involvement and exposure is wide-ranging. Describe for us what was happening with hockey in those years and what is so special about that.
Well, you know, when I first came here, UNH was probably 6 years away from an outdoor rink. Snively Arena had just been built, so that just showed you where hockey was in the state of New Hampshire when the best hockey team in the state was playing in an outdoor rink. But I find it interesting when Kenny talked about Russ. I moved over here from UNH, and you know, Russ was a great athlete at UNH. He was a great football player. He's in the Hall of Fame at UNH. Terrific athlete from Massachusetts. He grew up in Marblehead. My coach at Rutgers used to say that was a town in Massachusetts that was named after me. But when I first came here, Russ took me out to lunch, and he said he wanted me to get involved in the youth hockey program, that it was important to him. They just built a rink, and they needed young people who were interested in hockey to get involved in the youth hockey program. I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old who I had just taken to a Brady Concord High game. And that was back when Brady Concord High was crazy. And my kids walked out of that rink wanting to play hockey. So Russ talking to me about getting involved as a coach in youth hockey was right what I was looking for. And when you talk about hockey in Concord, Russ Martin, Mel McLean, Mr. Winship, those guys, without them, hockey would not have grown to the level that it's grown. Their contribution building a rink was instrumental. And when you talk about rinks, most of the hockey prior to that was outdoors. When you go all around New England and all around the areas where hockey grew, when they talk about Burrillville, Rhode Island, and Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and Providence, you talk about Lewiston, Maine, and St. Thomas, and Berlin, and Notre Dame, and they were all rinks built by communities because the private schools had the indoor rinks. The poor kids didn't have any indoor rinks. They skated outdoors. There were no indoor rinks. Kids here, the old rink rats here in Concord, they skated down the parking lot of Sacred Heart School or Sacred Heart Church. They skated up at White Park. They had no rinks. The rinks was at St. Paul's. The money had the rinks. The kids with no money had nothing until Russ Martin and those guys came along and built a rink. And whenever you go to these places that had great hockey, it's interesting to me that there was always a contrast between the wealthy kids who played in private schools and the other kids, whether you're talking about Minnesota where Ryan Brandt played out in Roseau or Hibbing or all of those places, Lake State, Lake Superior, those places where kids started off in outdoor rinks. And those guys putting us in an indoor rink here in Concord was absolutely instrumental to the growth of the game.
Terrific. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Dunk, you're a fixture at the Everett Arena, playing at all levels throughout the Concord Youth Hockey Association before heading off to Bishop Brady
in 1977, and then to Plymouth State College. You ranked second on their all-time scoring list with an impressive record of 62 goals, 75 assists, and 137 points, and are now in the Panthers Athletic Hall of Fame as of 1999. You became an assistant coach in 86-87 for the Tide before taking over as head coach in 1990-91 for the Tide, where you've been there for 32 years and counting, with an impressive record of 537 wins, 184 losses, and 22 ties. Your teams that you have coached appeared in 14 state championships while capturing 9 of those. Dunk, looking back, what does it mean to you to be such a part of a long hockey tradition in Concord?
Well, Jimmy, thanks. It means a lot, obviously. Growing up here, we were at White's Park playing boot hockey or playing on our skates. And then, I had friends that were going to Concord High, but a couple of my buddies were going to Brady, and it really came down to I did not like Rutland Junior High School. It was too big, so I went to Brady, which was probably the best thing that happened to me because I could play as a freshman, where if I had gone to Concord, I probably wouldn't have got to play until sophomore, and although Tilly tells me I never would have made that team, so it doesn't matter. But I know I would have. But whatever. So I went to Brady and played for Bud LeCurran, and like Bob Norton said, the rivalry back then was insane. It was so great in the '70s, and like even our kids that I coach now, even 10 years ago, like we played Brady, and there'd be 600-700 people, and people, the place was packed, and I'm thinking to myself, you guys have no idea what it was like. And it was just amazing playing in those games. So then, I went to college and I knew I wanted to coach and get out of college. And there was an assistant coaching job / JV coach. And Mr. Harbrick was the AD still and hired me. And I had no idea that 37 years later I'd still be doing it. But it's something I've always enjoyed. I love coaching and I've never looked at it as a job, and they actually pay me, so it's never like, I can count on one hand how many times in the last 33 years as a head coach where I'm like, we got practice today. It just doesn't happen because it's enjoyable. Yeah, and there's years that we're not as good, or you don't have as good a group kid-wise, But I've been fortunate. I've had great assistant coaches and good players, and none of that good kids. And I talk to a lot of coaches. The parents this, the parents that. I've been so lucky. I can tell you, our parents, they don't bother me, and they just let us coach. And so I've been really, really blessed. And so it means a lot for me to be part of the history of Concord High hockey. And even though I'm a Brady guy. It means a lot to me, and hopefully I can do it a few more years.
Excellent. I do have one follow-up question on that. You mentioned Bud LeCurran. I was wondering if you could tell the people here what it was like to play for Bud LeCurran. As I witnessed and heard, there was probably no coach around that got more out of his players than Bud LeCurran. And the great LeCurran family, of course, is local here to Concord.
Yeah, absolutely. Bud was, he was one of a kind, and, he wasn't an X's and O's guy. He was just a motivator. And like, we've all played for coaches, whatever sport that we didn't like. But I can honestly say I've never had a kid that I played with at Brady, or even a kid that played after me or before me that played for Bud that said, I didn't like Bud LeCurran. He was the best. Motivate you. He got the most out of every kid. And Bud was always, like, Brady's a small school, and we were, even when Brady was good, like, we were pretty good in high school. We got to the finals twice, but we were always the underdog because we were a small school, and we relied on, like, we had Bruce Gillies as our goalie, we had Johnny DiNapoli, a really good player, and then we'd have a handful of other guys that were okay, and then we had another handful of guys that were overachieving because of our coach, and he could push the right buttons better than anybody I've ever been around, and he was special. And today, would he survive? No chance. He wouldn't last long today. But he was the best. I loved him, and I think back to those days, and he was some of the things he said that today. Oh my God! But he was a great, and a lot of people in here know Bud, and he was great. He was like he just wanted to win for him so bad, and he he came across as this gruff, tough guy, which he was, but he cared about the kids so much, and just a great guy.
Tell them what time you practiced.
We practiced in the morning, which was, but there's teams that do that still, and Bud was old school. Like if you were, it could easily happen. Your alarm doesn't go off, and 5:30, and you get there at 5:32, and Bud was doors gone. See ya. You're not getting on the ice. I remember one time it was my senior year. We weren't that good. Bruce had graduated, and we were okay. And then one of these kids, he was a kid from Laconia, and between the second and third period, we're playing Dover over there. They were a brand new team. We're supposed to be winning by 4 or 5 goals. At the end of the second, it's like 1-1. And the parent came over to Bud and said, "Hey, coach, since I'm not going to say the kid's name, since he's not going to play, can I take him now?" And Bud said, "Take him and don't ever bring him back." But Bud was, like I said, today, it wouldn't last long. It'd be front page of the Monitor.
Thank you. Great addition to the story. George, your father taught and coached at St. Paul's School, and you grew up right there on campus at St. Paul's, just 3 or so miles from here. You also played youth hockey at White Park, and I had the good fortune of playing with you. When I was a senior, you were a freshman on the Crimson Tide for Concord High School. When you attended Milton Academy, you left your Concord friends behind and ended up playing against some of them. Maybe you can tell us what it was like to play against a bunch of your Concord local buddies.
Especially big rivalry between Bowdoin and Colby, and 3 guys from Colby were from Concord. Carl Methan, Carl Lovejoy, and Tommy Pancha, who's I think here. So that made those games, the rivalry, even better than ever. So yeah, I can't tell you how much fun that was. Yeah.
That's terrific. Your junior and senior years at Bowdoin College, you played for legendary Sid Watson.
Friend of Bob's, yeah.
And won the Division II National Championship in your senior year before heading off to play some hockey in Ontario, I understand. And then you moved to a beautiful town of Aspen, Colorado, where you played 5 seasons, maybe did some skiing also, in the Rockies for the Leafs. After teaching at the Dexter School when returning in Brookline, Mass., you ultimately came back to St. Paul's in 1992, where you taught until 2019. You partnered initially with Matt Soul of the boys varsity hockey team, as well as coaching the boys JV, girls JV, in the last 17 years with the girls varsity team.
With Ken's granddaughter, who's on the team right
Who was
now.
your goalie at Bowdoin?
Bob Menzies, when we won senior year.
I got to tell you a great story.
Go ahead.
When he mentioned that, this is a story about how inexact recruiting is. I had a reputation of being a pretty good recruiter, and I recruited some great players, but I had some major screw-ups. I recruited a kid by the name of Rob Menzies out of Sarnia, Ontario. The same year, I recruited Jamie Hislop and Bobby Gould. Pretty good players. But Rob Menzies was a really good goalie. But I had a kid down in Marblehead that I really liked, and we needed a goalie. So I was sold on this kid from Marblehead. I will not mention his name because he ended up not being able to play a lick. Sid Watson calls me on the phone. Sid and I were like this. I worked at hockey school there that he and Charlie ran for 20 years. So Sid, have you seen a goalie? If they never had any money to recruit, he used to always come on my dime. And he called me and said, do you have a goalie any place that you've seen that can help us? And I said, yeah, there's a kid up in Sarnia that we can't take because we're taking this kid from wherever. But I really think you ought to go look at him. His name was Rob Menzies. He ends up being an All-American, leads them to the national championship, and I got a guy who couldn't play. That's a true story.
Hey, thanks for that. I appreciate that. He was very good.
Well, I'm sure that was only one of a couple.
No, there were a few more.
We'll hear more later about some of the others besides the ones you mentioned that were on the plus side. Having grown up, George, on the campus of St. Paul's School, what are some of the earliest memories of St. Paul's? And were you at that time aware of its unique place in the local and national hockey history?
I'm not sure I knew the big picture of where the school fit in, but all I remember is every day after school, grabbing my skates and my stick, my gloves, going down to the skate house on the pond, now where the library is, unfortunately, and sitting around there. There was this guy who ran the skate shop there. His name was Duke. I'm not sure his last name. Do you remember Joe? Duke? I don't know. He was there sharpening skates, and he always had a fire going in the middle ring there. And I just could not wait after school every day. I'd run down there, grab my skates, and put them on, jump onto the pond. There were like 5 rinks set up down there. And we'd play until after dark. You couldn't even see the puck. But that was a lot of fun. Then I think it was in maybe the 70s they closed in the rink. They made it over a roof on the outdoor rink there.
The Gordon rink.
The Gordon rink, yeah. So that was where I spent my youth, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's great to relive some of those days and hear more about the hockey histories of yourself. Let's get started with our topic today. We go around the panelists to explore some of your recollections about hockey in and around Concord. First question, and each of you can answer this. I'll pass this right along. Were there any local hockey heroes that you watched in your time in Concord, or played against, or played with, besides yourself?
To tell you the truth, that my playing got limited because I got asked to referee Division I ECAC hockey, and Mr. Nord here can vouch for me. I did my first Beanpot game. I started the game too early. They usually have a red light. When they shut the red light off, you drop the puck. Well, I never saw the red light, so I think the game went 2 minutes over before we're ready to go. But anyway, no, if you go back for the Manchester Blackhawks and the Eastern Olympics, you used to had to go to the Everett Arena at 5:30 in the afternoon to line up to go to the game because the arena was jam-packed with people. The rivalry was great, and there wasn't a lot of money going on as far as what the players were receiving, but it was just great good hockey. You think of some of the guys from Manchester, Kangaroo Hebert, Normie Jacques Lemaire, and Tino the goalie, but that was really big time hockey in Concord.
What?
Yeah, I coached youth hockey for probably 20 years. 3 kids through youth hockey, so that adds up after Mike Squirts, Peewees, Bams, midgets, to about 20 years, and you add it all up. Would be on the list. She was terrific. One of the things I haven't understood over the years is why that rink. I know the arena is named after Everett, but I don't understand why the rink isn't named after her. Because we don't have many like her. We don't have many that were as good as her. And she played with the boys all the way through. And finally I went to her dad at the end. We played the New England Midget Tournament up in Lewiston, Maine. And Tommy Pacho Dick's son was coach with me. And this is the top high school players in New England. And she was the best player in the tournament. And I went to her dad after the game was over, and I said, this ought to be it for her. Because the guys are a little too physical, and she's gonna get hurt. She's better than all of them, but it's just a question of she's not big enough to survive if this continues. And she went on to be one of the best players in the world. When she won the Olympics in Japan, there wasn't a better hockey player in the world than Tara Mountain.
Terrific.
I second that. That was impressive. I remember one guy that, I don't know if anyone remembers him, but I remember one game when I first started playing down at White Park. It was kind of throw the puck in the middle of the ice, coach, and play. And this guy who I knew casually, but was a little bit older than I was, his name was Mark Stuckey. And he's gone on, he went on to have a great career at Princeton and a professional career in Europe and coached there and still lives there actually. So he's had a career as a professional player and coach. But I remember vividly when I was 7 or 8 down at the rink there, and I was on the ice and he was there, and I was stumbling around, and somehow he bumped into me on the boards, and he was just dribbling through the whole crowd, and he hit me, and he goes, what are you doing? You're just choking me up here. Get out of my way. You don't know what you're doing. And of course I didn't compared to him. He was going around everyone else. So, but that was one of my vivid memories. He and Eric Eberhardt were probably the standouts on that rink that night. But I will always remember him being so frustrated when he ran into me and lost the puck, and I had no idea what I was doing. So he was a great guy.
Take that back 1 second. Talking about Mark Stuckey, a great friend of mine. I'm still in contact with him. He's actually in Austria now, but played 19 years of professional hockey over there. He's married, he's got a couple daughters, and visits his brother in Portland, and one is in Arizona periodically. But I grew up skating at St. Paul's, fortunately, in the early 60s, late 50s, and as well as White Park. And Mark was one of the first guys who I ever saw curve a hockey stick. We'd boil him in water. He'd put it under the old big radiators against the wall and just bend it, and then put a bunch of books from probably the St. Paul's library underneath the other end. And he'd have a hook that was about 3 inches. It would wrap right around the hockey puck just about. Which back in those days, when people started using curved sticks, I don't think there were any limits to how big of a curve he could have. But Mark was slight in size, but very strong. And he's probably, last time I saw him, and I'm sure he hasn't changed, he's probably 5'7" or maybe 8" and about 140 pounds maybe. But he's a golf pro over in Austria now.
Done.
Easy, what was the question again? Is it who we played with or who we coached? Or who we...
Best player.
Yeah, I got a story. I played Concord Youth Hockey, and the first year I was on a travel team was 1972. Dr. Berger Carlson was our coach, and so I was a first-year squirt. So most of my buddies were a year older than me, Tilly and Beaver Store, and those guys were always second-year guys. I was first-year guys, so I'd play with them for a year. Ken Carlson, obviously. So Berger was talking about old school. Back then, you could go to a game and not hit the ice because you're playing to win. And even though everybody's paying the same amount of money for youth hockey, it didn't matter back then. Like Berger wanted to win, and but on that team, and we didn't realize till later, but it's amazing. Ken Carlson obviously played in the National Hockey League, and Doug Brown was a kid. His father was a professor at St. Paul's. And Dougie Brown was on that team. He was a year younger than me. I think I was a first-year scorer, and he was a year younger than me. So, but he was that good then. So we had 2 kids on our squirt travel team when I was that age that ended up playing the National Hockey League. And Doug Brown had a long career. He won some cups with Detroit, and Greg Brown's his younger brother. And then they moved to, they ended up going to St. Mark's. Their father got a job, I think, down there, and that's where they went. And then Greg had a great career, played a little bit in the pros, and now he's the head coach at Boston College. So that was kind of cool, that, not knowing at the time, but then as years went on, 2 of those kids from our squirt team played the National Hockey League, which was pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome. That's cool. Thank you.
Well, Ken, go back to you, Ken. You arrived in Durham in 1958, having played your minor hockey in Toronto. So let's start with this question. I know you had Toronto has a rich hockey history, particularly with the Maple Leafs, particularly in the 50s and early 60s. Not so much recently, but they're on the rebound. When you first came to New Hampshire, when did you realize about what a rich hockey history Concord and New Hampshire had?
Well, Jimmy, the funny thing is that when I came down to UNH, the plan was I never met Coach Pepper Martin, but the plan was when we drove into Durham to give him a call, and he would meet my mom and dad and my brother and take me up to the alumni house, which is not there anymore. It got tore down to part of making Paul Smith College. But anyway, so I had a big steamer trunk. So we took the trunk upstairs to the 3rd floor, and Pepper told my brother where to go to a motel in Dover, and we didn't have any cell phones at that time. So he said, "I'll take you to the rink." And it's like a Sunday night. It had some drizzle that afternoon, so we go over to the rink. And he puts the lights on. It's an outdoor rink. And I'm like, have I made a mistake coming here? It's all the sand floor and weeds growing up in one end particularly. And my jaw just kind of dropped, and Coach Martin says, well, I know you're a little disappointed, but he said the legislature's going to be voting to put a cover on this roof. Put a cover on the rink, pardon me. So that was my first, meeting of they called it a bachelor rink. It was artificial ice, but I certainly was shocked and thought, maybe I made a big mistake, because I had a chance to go to St. Lawrence, and I chose to come to New Hampshire, and I didn't know they didn't have any other Canadians there, and anyway, we had a good time. We had a tractor with a big broom on it to go around and clean the ice, and all the students would jump over there and shovel the snow over the boards. And then at Christmas time, I got called into the director's admissions office, Harry Carroll, and he said, "Kenny, I know you're going back to Toronto for Christmas." He reaches in his desk and gives me an application. He said, "If you find anybody else that could help our team, let me know." So I took that application with me. I did have one more year of junior hockey, so I called up my old coach when I got to Toronto and told him here from this date to this date for Christmas recess, and is there any chance I could play for it? He said, "Sure, yeah, we'll let it happen." He gave me the dates. So on the first game against Unionville, there's the guy Tommy Cannon. Tommy and I had played Pee Wee together, played bantam, played midget. So I told him I'm at UNH, it's a good school academically. I said, they gave me an application, which we're going to play your team in my 4th game, so I'll bring the app up. So I got Tommy to sign up. He came down. The next year we needed a goalie because Rod Blackburn was graduating. So he knew Doug Dunning, so Dougie came down. And then my senior year, Brad Houston, his dad worked with my dad at Eaton's of Canada. He was playing for Toronto Marbles Junior A. So I went home on spring break, just watched him at Maple Leaf Gardens, talked him and his girlfriend to coming down. But you have to realize, for all those people I recruited, I did not tell them it was an outdoor rink. But anyway, that's my story about, then they put a roof on Snively and away they went. So there we go.
Thank you, Ken. Here's an excerpt which came from Deanna Pearl, the archivist at St. Paul's School. And I quote, "The oldest publication began in June of 1860. Fourth issue, volume 1, number 4, December 1860. There's a mention of skating on the pond there at St. Paul's School. Acknowledged as the cradle of hockey, St. Paul's School hockey has been synonymous since the afternoon of November 17th, 1883. It's kind of amazing they were playing hockey in November 17th. When we're praying for ice at White Park for the 1883 Black Ice Tournament in a couple of weeks. When the school community gathered on the lower school pond to witness the first game ever played in the United States with those rules, the love of the fabled black ice was universal, and the boys, masters, and their families looked forward to its early arrival. I now have some photos and a video clip of St. Paul's. Hobie Baker.
This is a group of players from the park. They're out playing out to St. Paul's School, one of their teams.
We'll hold there, and this is from at the drop of a puck. From you people, those of you who are from Concord, written by Stephen W. Winship, which was talked about before. He was a goalie, of course, I believe at Dartmouth College, and one of the early founders and key people to the Concord youth hockey, and later the Everett Arena and those early teams. Concord has for years been called the cradle of American hockey, but long before its first American rules and formal teams took form in this city, boys were engaging in a distinctively fast, invariably broiling contest on skates and local ponds, the Merrimack River, and a place where the organized game started in the United States, St. Paul's School. In fact, Annals of a City report, skating was popular in the earliest of times of 1720s in the original hamlet of Pennycook, spelled Penny, P-E-N-N-Y-C-O-O-K, right here on Horseshoe Pond behind us, which at that time, back in the early 1700s, this was Pennycook down here, which soon became a favorite spot for skaters and skating parties. Those two references certainly sound like the start of organized hockey began in Concord, but was there another era that you experienced hockey in Concord where it simply took off? If you guys wouldn't mind answering that.
You know, I think when you look at hockey in Concord, it really took off about the same time that hockey took off in the Boston area. When you look at the 70s, late 60s and 70s to the Bruins had a lot to do with the growth of hockey in Boston. And if you ride around Boston to this day, you see NBC rinks all over the place. And those all date back to the 60s, about the same time that Everett Arena and the Manchester Arena were being built. So the growth of the Bruins, really, I think, and the Stanley Cup the Bruins won back then, I think had a lot to do with the growth of hockey in New England. And as you look around the country and you wonder how hockey players are now coming from Los Angeles and Dallas and Atlanta and places all over the country, almost all of them are connected to the growth of NHL franchises in those areas. If you see an NHL franchise going into Seattle, I'll tell you in 10 years, a lot of the real top youth hockey players, younger players, are going to be coming out of Seattle because that's what's going to happen. It's happened everywhere, and it happened here, and I give a lot of credit to the growth of the Bruins in that Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I have one story that I vividly remember, and I think a couple of guys in this room were at the same game. And imagine this happening today. Okay, I think it was the Eastern Olympics, or maybe it could have been the Coachman, scheduled a game against the Bruins. Do you remember this? The Bruins came up, Pye McKenzie, Eddie Johnston, Fred Stanfield, they were all up here. They came up to do some sort of fundraiser, and we, of course, had been to every game all year. So we're saying, "Oh man, our Olympics, they can give them a good show. They can play. They're going to be tough against the Bruins." You know, after a period, it was probably 20-0. You know, they had to change shirts and make it even. But I remember standing there, probably with John Stevenson, and we were waiting to get our autographs from Pye McKenzie and Johnny Busick and all these guys. And I go, "Man, this is unbelievable. We're watching the Bruins right here at the Everett Arena. This is the best." Then I realized hockey was here in Concord. I'm saying this was the real deal.
Yeah, I really can't talk that. The other thing I can think of is when Brady beat Berlin 6-5 in the semifinals in '73. That might have been when hockey took off. But that still is probably the greatest upset in the history of high school sports. And I remember it was a Wednesday night because it was semifinal, and I was 10, so I probably had squirt practice. And I remember being in the car listening to the radio, and Brady had beaten Berlin 6-5 to go to the finals. They had Joe, and they had Cecil, and Mike Garafalo, and a couple other guys. And what they beat you during the year, Joe, like 15-2 or something?
Wasn't close.
Yeah. But no, obviously, Bobby Orr, 1970. I was 7 in 1970, so that's. I can remember like so many kids started playing hockey, and you know, TV 38 and the Bruins. So obviously that was the real reason. But that's still the greatest upset in the history of high school sports, in my opinion.
I'll tell you a quick sidelight about that game. I was there scouting the game with Coach Holt, and we were scouting Cecil, because Cecil was special.
What about Joe?
Every time I see Joe, he says the same thing to me. "You ended my career, you cut me." But anyway, Cecil was unbelievable. And I asked Coach Holt after the game, and Cecil eventually came to play for us as a freshman. Did not exactly have a love affair with his books. But he was the best kid. He was a terrific kid, a great player. But I asked Coach Holt at the end of the game, I said, "What you think of Cecil?" He says, "I can't believe it. He never came off the ice. He played the entire game."
And he only came in his own for in-zone faceoffs, right?
Only half the ice time, so we've only played half the game.
The defensive, he was a stranger to the defensive zone. Not unlike yourself, I might add.
Thank you for sharing those stories. Terrific. White Park, that's located less than 3 miles from the ponds at St. Paul's School. The city of Concord received a gift of land from Amenia White in memory of her husband, Nathaniel. The deed for White Park was conveyed to the city of Concord in 1884. He was a businessman involved with transportation, hotels, and banking, the founder of the American Express Company. White Park sits on 23.4 acres and defined by the 5 residential streets: Washington, Center, White, Liberty, and Beacon. It's a beautiful piece of land with steep slopes and a high water table. In the mid to late 1880s, the renowned landscape architect Charles Elliott designed the park. 2 ponds were excavated to help direct the flow of the water from the freshwater springs on the hillside. We've got some photos and video from White Park to show at this time.
Recreation and Parks Department, cleaning the rink. Take up the lower
This kite.
all the snow right out of the rink. Works very well. This is how you flood the rink. You start at one end, walk down, go further back to the center
I say,
Great sale.
Coached by Steve Winship and Russ Martin. This is the Shamrock hockey team playing Laconia. Ken McKinnon going up the ice.
Yeah, smooth as ever, smooth as ever. Look at him.
You're afraid to dish it, Kenny.
that's a puck, Kenny.
No need.
John Eisner. Ronnie Sweeney bringing it back up the ice. It's Fonzie
Fonzie.
Earl.
Oh, yeah.
Many other senior hockey teams played out of Concord. The Millville Bruins, of course, played right out of Hopkinton, but played many games here in Concord. The White Park Hockey Club, the Concord Hockey Club, the Shamrocks, of course, the Coachmen, the Eastern Olympics, and the Budmen, as well as Sacred Heart, which is shown there. I'd like to hear more about your experiences with any of those teams that you might have either played against, well, Ken, we can maybe address this to you, or even watched. That could be many of you. There were some exciting times and big rivalries. Some were touched on already. Concord, Manchester probably being the biggest for senior amateur hockey. Ken, you want to address that?
I think I'm going to pass the mic here on the board.
No, that's fine.
I'm too young, I didn't see those
Yeah,
games.
I didn't ever see it. You're trying to see some of that. I'm too young, I haven't seen those things.
I only was watching my dad play. He played for the Shamrocks and the Coachman, but I was not in town when I was old enough to play for them.
Yeah, I remember catching the tail end of the Eastern Olympics, but it was like 71 or 72, and it wasn't quite, I guess, what it was, the previous couple of years. The Budmen, obviously, we all saw the Budmen play, and that was entertaining. There was, Bloody and Dave Jack and the whole crew, Heathy and Stuffy was in that. And, so those days were fun. I was in high school going to those games, but when they played the Blackhawks, it was a big deal, and it was fun to watch, and fights and everything. It was great.
Yeah, we used to always count on a few fights from especially when the team from, where was the Carling Black Labels. You guys remember those guys? Guaranteed fight. Bench clearers every time.
The next team that we'd like to talk about, and I'm not sure is Tom Champagne here tonight? No. Sacred Heart played on the rink downtown on Pleasant Street, right behind their church, which is now condominiums. They were formed in 1929, 1930, and they concluded play after the 1952 campaign. At times, that picture there is down on their rink, and I'll show the other clips in 1 second. But at times, 1,200 fans would line the boards. Snow, most of the time, would be almost up to the top of the boards on the outside. I remember seeing a picture of Tom Champagne's father before he started playing for them, standing on top of the snowbank as a youngster. And in fact, Tom's father, Tom, who's still here in Concord on Fruit Street, he's, according to our records, is the last surviving member of that Sacred Heart hockey team. Some of you might not know that the team hosted before the Oslo Olympics. The U.S. hockey team came to Concord and played a game against the Sacred Heart team. Sacred Heart was up after 2 periods. They may have gone in to get warm between periods, came out, ended up losing the game. So I don't know what they had in the locker rooms, but something happened. They lost the game 8-6. And in the following video that we'll show in a second, take note of the goal judge's position. No thank you as far as I'm concerned, but back in those days, this is where the goal judges were. Chris, if you'd run those.
Sacred Heart Hockey Club. There was a rink down Pleasant Street behind the French church. And that's where they played the game.
Do that for black eyes.
Maine, and teams in Massachusetts would come up here. And they had a lot of good players.
This here is a nice garment that was given to us. The first one was the, you can hang right there. The first one was Doug Everett's 1932 Winter Olympic jacket that the family gave to us, the New Hampshire Legends of Hockey. And this, of course, is a picture of Tara Mounsey winning her Olympic gold medal, which I think everybody probably remembers that photograph on the ice. Terrific. There's one other story I wanted to tell about the Olympics. In fact, the 1932 Olympics. Most of you probably aren't aware, but this George Chase right here, his grandfather, John Chase, was the captain of the 1932 Olympics hockey team, which Doug Everett played for. So he guided them in Oslo, and the family had given the New Hampshire Legends of Hockey, not shown here tonight, video footage of the 1932 Olympics in Lake Placid for pretty much every sport you can almost imagine. Sled dog racing, ice dancing, ski jumping, the toboggan, not the toboggan, the bobsled runs, hockey inside and outside in Lake Placid at that time in 1932. So there's three connections really to the city of Concord. Our two Olympians, and then of course John Chase captaining the 1932 Winter Olympic hockey team. Of course, the Everett Arena didn't open, we've talked about that earlier, till November of 1965. So not everyone enjoyed a covered rink in dressing rooms. In fact, I think one of the games, I think maybe the very first game that was played there to open the rink up, I think I still recall it, is Dartmouth against UNH, just before that in earlier November, that season. Any good stories about those early days skating outside? Ken, you probably would have some. You probably all have some. What is your fondest memories, and what did you hate most about it? I know I hated the cold. I hated to tie my skates outside when your fingers wouldn't even move.
Well, the unfortunate thing is we had a big incident that happened. I came down with the flu, and our Concord Shamrocks were playing the Alpine Club. And of course, the Alpine Club is primarily a very strong French background. And our referee-in-chief was John Tarzan Healy. I think a lot of you probably remember John. He was a strong ECAC official, and he was our referee-in-chief. And our team, the Shamrocks, were playing the Alpine Club. They said I was not there at the game, but the story was that Ralph Terrian, a defenseman for the Alpine Club, pulled down John Healy's toque and punched him in the nose and broke John's nose. So sure enough, I heard that story. I mean, we had a hearing, and Ralph Terrian was banned from playing hockey anywhere in the United States. But that gives you an idea of some of the rough and tumble stuff that was going on. You talk about excitements with George, you said there was always a fight going on somewhere.
Yeah,
But,
with certain teams, definitely.
yeah.
Thank you, Ken. I wanted to point out, talking about Tara Mounsey earlier, and George, I think we'll have you maybe address the question, but in the Monitor, I came across through the microfilm at the State Library article and photograph of Doug Everett, who organized and coached girls hockey in a hockey league. There were 3 teams at White Park, 1936 and 1937, as well as the subsequent year. Some of those last names you might recognize. Not sure if I'm going to pronounce this first one correctly. Ianuzzo, I-A-N-U-Z-Z-O. Marchand, we all know Marchand. Champagne, Marquis, Ferretra, Martin, Cozy, and Andrews were just some of those names. George, on this one, what do you recall about women's hockey in the era before and after Title IX in 1973? Can you address that?
I'm not sure I can that well, but I do remember that's when St. Paul started the girls' women's team, early 70s, and they had quite a collection of interesting players there who went on to play for college teams, actually. Yeah, my wife she started playing at Title IX. She started playing at Middlebury and she was on, it was such a unique thing back in those days that they had a story on the national news about women playing hockey, at Middlebury College. And, there was Kathy Molson was on the team. I remember she was an instigator of Molson Beer. She was from up in Montreal. And, but even then, half the girls on the team were wearing figure skates, and they were, going up and down the boards doing their toe picks. So.
I remember what Tara said when they interviewed her at the Olympics. They asked her about obstacles that she faced growing up to play hockey. They said, did you face any difficulties playing? And she had a great line that I think says all you need to hear about Concord hockey. She says, no, they always let me play with the boys. And that's all you need to know about what happened here. Those girls who played Concord hockey before there was a girls program were always playing with the boys. Didn't make any difference. And if the girls teams weren't good enough, they played with the boys. And I think that was a key thing, because a lot of towns, there were obstacles put up to girls playing with boys. And as a matter of fact, lots of times the girls were better than the boys.
Well, I believe our time is winding down, but we can't thank the Concord Historical Society enough for letting us talk a little bit about the history of Concord here in New Hampshire. I think we're going to talk to them later about the possibility of a 24-hour podcast on hockey, which I think we could fill with these guys certainly, and a few other guests. So stay tuned and keep an eye on the New Hampshire Historical Society website. Thank you very much.
Jim, why don't we let there be a couple of questions?
Sure. Do we have a couple questions from our audience here tonight?
You got the experts here.
If we don't, maybe take a phone call. We'll take a phone call if we can get a...
I have a question, but just a comment. You're talking about girls and women's hockey. I recall when I was like 12 years old. My mother, Olga, strapped on the pads when my dad was going to Concord. And they had a women's game down at every arena. I can't all remember who was all out there on the ice, but it was pretty unique. And I remember cheering my mother on.
Well, that's great. So goaltending runs in the family, certainly. How about you? You're a defenseman.
I didn't want those 9-mile-an-hour things.
I just want to say one thing. No talk about hockey in Concord. At the end, without mentioning Dick Ryerson. The first 2 state championships were won by Dick Ryerson, and it would be really criminal if we had a discussion here about hockey. All the guys that played for Ryer would say, what happened to us? First 2 state championships, in the history of Concord, won by Dick Ryerson. And he always told me he never won a state championship with his best team. His best teams were the 2 off years. But a great coach and a real fundamental part of the city.
Absolutely.
Here, here.
Yeah, definitely, rest in peace.
Anybody else? You got one?
Yeah, one question
I
here.
just had a comment. I grew up in Pennacook and used to go and watch the Eastern Olympics. And Ryan Brandt was my science teacher at Merrimack Valley High School. I wasn't in high school, I was in junior high. And it was a big deal to go down on Saturday night to watch the games. Now, somebody brought up the rivalry between the Blackhawks and the Eastern Olympics. And there were bench clearing brawls, but there were fights in the stands, too. As a kid, I was like, oh, Jesus. You know, because it was pretty scary at times. But it was great, it was awesome, and I really appreciate all of you.
One more.
One more question, anyone?
Well, how did you enjoy it, huh? Second Thursday of the month.